think this is the most difficult part of building the entire department, is finding the right people.
Yeah, definitely. It is. It's tough. And it's, I've done it in a couple of agencies now. And I think I've got some good insights, some good kind of things that I can share that will be helpful. But I agree, really, really challenging.
Yeah, I think I posted on LinkedIn recently about this. I think one of my biggest takeaways from 2023 when it comes to building out team is proactivity. I know proactivity is something we preach with our team in terms of their project management and their workload. But from my end, looking at proactivity of just recruiting people and not waiting until we were at a point where there was a fire or there was client mess ups happening to have people that were opportunities to bring into the agency, whether it's a designer, a copywriter, a creative strategist, whatever it may be. That's been a huge learning experience for me, is just setting aside time and making sure that there is avenues or strategies in place to be recruiting and nurturing potential talent. Because at the end of the day, we sell creative, we sell graphic design, but what we really sell is talent. It's finding talent that can provide a great service to the clients that we work with as well. But going into the interview, the hiring process, that is when people have their best character on, their best performance on. And it can be very easy to hire quickly, like the phrase is, hire quick, fire fast, and bring the wrong person in. And
Yeah.
we've done quite a bit to be able to try to focus on bringing the right people in, right? Have the processes in to be able to bring the right people on board.
I think there's two really big separate components to that as well, the hiring part, which I've definitely learnt the hard way a few times. And one big part of it that I think is quite often overlooked is the culture fit side. There's 101 ways you can assess the actual skill of the individual in alignment to the job role or the job description. And we can get into that as well, because that is also important. That was a very loud motorbike. I don't know if you caught that going past my house. But the culture fit is the bit that you can't teach. And I think in agencies, and definitely I would say maybe like small to mid-sized agencies, so kind of like where my career history has all been, the culture fit is so important. And if you don't have that right culture fit in this kind of size of agency, it becomes so blindingly obvious, and it becomes such a huge issue for, in a small team, kind of one person can have a really big impact. So I think in terms of the hiring process and finding the right person for the role, those are the two bits that I'd say are the most important. Is definitely skills for the role, but also the culture fit.
How do you generally go about assessing culture fit during the interview process?
Yeah, so it's hard. Like I've changed hiring process a few times to try and get this right. And even with, the latest processes that I was running before, we still had like one kind of person slip through that was a really poor culture fit. But basically the way we kind of changed it was to have a lot of like invested time, I guess. And, one of the things I used to say about my old agency was if I had to go through the hiring process there, I probably never, as in the way it was when I worked on it, I would never have got the job, because I probably wouldn't have stuck around for that many hoops to jump through, being completely transparent. But it did usually find the right person. So we kind of went through a few different stages. First one would be like a form fill with some industry or role specific questions, quite easy questions, but very quickly you can kind of separate the people who know what they're talking about from the people who don't. And with that, they submit the questions in the CV. Then we would look at the questions in the CVs and then invite them to give a 2-minute video explaining why they think they would be a good fit for the role. If we like the video, then they got invited to an interview with our sort of HR ops manager. So that was more so the culture fit culture fit interview. So she had some set questions based kind of around the values that we operated from in the agency, some questions related specifically to those, and then just broader questions, kind of get to know you questions, those type of things. And if they passed the culture fit interview, then they had an exercise. And if they passed the exercise, then they had final interview with usually me, because if they were hiring for my department, then I would be the final interviewer. If they're going into a different department, they'd get interviewed by the head of that department. And that was also, looking for those culture fit signals, but that was the much more technical last step. So actually, we prioritized culture before even skills. Like if they didn't pass the culture stage, we didn't really care about whether their skills were right or not, because that just spells disaster if the culture fit isn't there.
Yeah, that entire process very aligned with what we're doing now, with a few tweaks that we've made, or a few things that we're not doing that you were doing at your previous agency. I think that, looking at getting applications on LinkedIn, on Indeed, on Upwork, wherever, recruiting agencies, wherever you're getting it from, they're a good starting point, but it's very tough to grade or to trust in a resume just because, frankly, university experience doesn't really mean a lot when it comes to digital marketing, because the way you did things 2 years ago or a year ago is not how you do them now. So it's difficult to trust in a university textbook to be able to keep up with that. And then even working at another agency, you know, agencies may have good processes. They may not have good processes. They may have good, performance expectations. They may not. So it's difficult to trust in, a specific agency background unless you already know that you've hired from that agency before. So having that pre-interview form to send people once they have actually completed an application, first, it's a filtering. Generally, we see like each step of the process, about 10% of people make it through. So let's say, you have 1,000 people that apply on LinkedIn. Roughly about 10% of those people are actually going to fill out your pre-interview form and take that extra effort once you send it over to them. And then roughly about 10% of those people will pass the pre-interview form. Right.
Do
And
you know what? It's so funny actually now. It's just reminded me that pre-interview form that we did. I remember the last round of hiring I did before I left that agency. I was going through the forms and I could see so a mile off who had put the questions in ChatGPT and
yeah,
copied and pasted the answers into the forms. And there was one, oh God, I can't remember what it was now. Oh, that's such a shame. I can't remember. There was one where they'd copied and pasted something which was literally GBT's response. And it was, I'm not sure what you meant by that question, or something along those lines. And I was like, oh my God, you haven't even proofread your ChatGPT submission to my form. Yep, no chance. You're going through to the next phase.
yeah, that's one thing I have noticed. And you can notice it by responses like that, or generally if they have like if you have multiple submissions from different people and they all have like the same bullet point format in your response, or the same like numbered format in your response, like here's the process that I would do to solve this problem. First, it's like, I love the amount of text, but this is not it. Right. So what I try to do is ask questions that put people in the what would I do mode versus the what did I do mode, to like actually problem solve and see if they can understand how to attack an issue, versus like, give me an example of how you might combat or how you used to combat this or that. Right. So we found that that's helpful. And then you said you have a video as a second step. What we've done is just included the last answer on the pre-interview form is a request for a Loom video URL link. Cool. With 4 or 5 questions specific to, what they're looking for in a new role, what they want as their future career opportunities, and then 2 or 3 other questions just to assess that culture fit, and also just to understand what their communication style is like, understand what it would be like to talk with them on a daily basis as well.
Yeah, I think that is a really important one as well. And every agency I've worked with has been really kind of international, multi-countries, like people from literally all over the globe. And I mean, this is maybe a side fireside chat. I don't understand agencies that insist on being local and coming into an office because you're so restricted on the talent. But I think that video stage is really important because there are different accents, there are different levels of understandability. Is that person going to be client facing on calls as well? Like you kind of need to get a handle on those things and get visibility of those things as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a I don't think looking for that communication is a bad thing, right? Because just because, like, let's say at BrighterClick, most of our clients are United States based, right? So to me, it makes sense to make sure that someone is going to be able to communicate effectively in the United States market, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just because they can't doesn't mean they're a bad hire. They're just not a good fit for us, right? They
No,
may need to
totally.
focus on an agency that generally sources clients in that market that they're best fit for communication.
Yeah, totally. It's funny
So
actually, yeah, that I really like the first client calls that I have when they're like, UK.
yeah, trying to guess I mean, there can be a fun bit with that too, especially when you have clients that are international, and just start talking about the different, regions. We recently had a first client call where somebody was from Austria and somebody's from Australia, right? You're from the
Mm.
UK, I'm from the United States. So it's kind of a bit of like different points of the world colliding.
I love it. I really love it. And I think it's funny actually, in all the remote agencies I've worked, everyone is really kind of interested in like travel and the kind of digital nomad style of life and getting around. And I think there's something there with like entrepreneurial spirit and like a kind of like wider culture view and wanting to kind of live and have different experiences in different places and different cultures. And it fits well, I think, with, as we work with clients, we're quite often working with the founder or, kind of the growth person, and definitely so more so in the founder space. Yeah, they're all kind of those same like-minded entrepreneurial individuals with the same kind of interests, and they make for some really good conversations.
Yeah, yeah, and going back to where we were talking about kind of the 10% feed down or filtering when it comes to the overall process. You can get a lot of applications on Indeed, on LinkedIn, on Upwork, whatever it is. And, just like agencies can do like spray and pray cold outreach through LinkedIn DMs and stuff like that, mass applying for jobs is a very real thing, right? The job market right now is very difficult. People want to find a new opportunity and fully understand, that people are looking for an opportunity so that they can meet their needs, right? But on the hiring side, it is our job to make sure we're filtering through to find the right people to bring on the team so it supports the rest of the team and growth. And that 10% breakdown with the pre-interview form and stuff is helpful, but still, even with that, the wrong fits could get through. And one thing that I've
Yeah.
been working to do to help eliminate that as quickly as possible on the initial actual interview, 15 minutes, face to face through Google Meet. First question I'll ask now is, based on the job posting that we have, just kind of tell me your understanding of what we're looking for. And that will really help understand early on if someone actually read the job description, has experience in the role, because they're going to take their experience and loop it in on what you're looking for. Because if they just reiterate exactly what you posted, there's a chance that they don't have good bandwidth of solving the problems that we're trying to hire for. So that's one thing that
Yeah.
I've been trying to work into the mix, just to make sure that there's good clarity on they have experience in the role and they know what we're going after. They're not just trying to fill a seat as quickly as possible. Have you ever seen any issues or any kind of bottlenecks in the hiring process when it comes to that?
No, actually, can't say I have. I think because the hiring process that I was really closely involved with before had those like quite, laborious steps.
Mm-hmm.
It would be very unlikely that someone would kind of come to an interview at that stage where I was final interview that they were kind of that far away from the role or the job description. So no, I wouldn't say I have had that before. But I think, you're right. And the kind of mass applying for jobs, I get it. I do really get it. And I don't even necessarily the amount of CVs. I think there must be a GPT somewhere, and if there isn't, let's build one to like mass check CVs for you. But the amount of CVs I've looked at and the amount of people that don't, customize the CV for the job application, not even, the first intro paragraph. Like I would quite often be hiring for media buying roles, and they'll be talking a lot about how they're an expert in Google PPC. And I'm like, I'm not hiring for a Google PPC job. I'm hiring specifically for paid social. Like you obviously haven't tailored it. And it's really hard not to, and it's a fine balance. And I think it depends on yourself as an individual, perhaps what kind of manager you are as well. Part of me, like, I have a lot of empathy to that. Like, I've been in a situation where when I was freelancing, I didn't want to freelance anymore. I really wanted to go into an agency environment and start getting experience there. I applied to so many jobs, so I do get it. Like, we're all humans, but you kind of have to have a balance there. Like, there has to be a little bit of care and attention. Like, I couldn't accept, I wouldn't ever really move anyone forward who'd put on their kind of introductory part of their CV a completely different role. But there is a bit of a, okay, I kind of get it. Like, you've got experience in paid social as well. Do I want to speak to you? Like, that all plays into it. But that's what makes it really time consuming. And I think with hiring, I do joke about, let's build a chat GPT to check CVs, but you can't skip the steps. You really can't. And I think that's where bad hiring decisions can potentially be made, is if you don't take the time. One of your phrases, Colby, actually, that you use a lot that I like is slow down to speed up. And I think this is a perfect example of that, where you have to just slow down, read the CVs, take the time, don't take the shortcuts, because that's where bad hires, I think, become more and more likely.
And it's so important to make sure you have your job description, but also just like an internal log of, what are we currently trying to solve with the role? Of course, like, let's say with graphic designer, you're trying to, find somebody that can do design on X platform, or I don't mean Twitter by that, a certain platform with it, but also just kind of take into assessment of, like, who is our current team member in this role, or how is it currently being handled, and what are we missing? Like, what do we think we need that we're not currently happy with? And make a list of those things and look for those opportunities. It may be proactive communication, it may be quality control, whatever it may be. What are those things? And then how can we make sure we're looking for that? Because like you said, if you skip the hiring process, or just kind of jump into hiring somebody out of desperation because you need to fix a fire, then you're going to likely bring somebody in that's incorrect. And then, you feel like you're fixing it, but that's really just short term, because in the long term, they might not be a good fit. And even, if we're looking at building effective creative teams, one thing that I've really been working on, and, we've had conversations about, is making sure that someone has experience in the exact thing that we want. So graphic designers, for example, it's very obvious with a media buyer, if somebody has Google ad experience or Facebook experience, like, they know how to run Google ads, but probably don't know how to do Facebook that effective, and probably don't know how to do Pinterest or Snapchat or whatever it may be. Design work or even copywriting work for creative teams is very similar, right? Just because you can design a good logo does not mean that you can design great Facebook ads or great YouTube thumbnails
100%.
or
Yeah.
email marketing or whatever it may be. So making sure that their portfolio that they send you has real examples of the channel or the execution strategy that you're going for has been a thing we've kind of really been focusing on as of late.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think for me, the difference is, I don't know what another comparable example would be. Bringing someone into the team who is great with designing websites and logos, and, if their portfolio is full of stunning graphic design work and you can see the skill is there, like, it's tempting, or it can be a bit, you can make the assumption, hey, this person knows how to do graphic design, this person knows their way around Illustrator, Photoshop, etc., and they absolutely do. But are they going to be an expert at building performance marketing creative? That is a completely different kettle of fish, because with a website, you've got a bit more of a captive audience. With a paid social ad, you've got to catch someone's attention in about 0.3 milliseconds. And so the design, structure, color, like, everything should be entirely different, because the strategy and the kind of, what you're asking that design to do is totally different. And I think, that I'd say is a really massive part of it. But the other part of that as well, I think, in terms of hiring someone who's got experience in that direct or same niche, is how much they'll be able to move the department forward or move that area forward if they are kind of, a true performance marketing diehard fan. Like, I'm performance marketing through to my core. Like, cut me and I bleed probably blue Facebook colors. But that brings so much passion to my role. Like, I'm always looking for new ideas. I'm always looking at new opportunities. I love scrolling through LinkedIn, seeing what other people are doing, capturing that as ideas for our clients. Like, I love doing that stuff. It really lights me up. And that, I think, is a huge reason why I've been just generally successful in my career. And I think when you don't have someone in the seat who has that same passion and drive for what they do, if really they want to be somewhere else, if really they want to be designing websites or logos, then they're not going to be able to move a performance marketing creative team forward at the same rate as someone who really loves performance marketing creative. You know, I have done private client work, and I'm by history a media buyer turned creative strategist, and I turned my hand at a few Canva designs, and it was not for me. But like, it was quite kind of exciting, and at least I knew the basics of where to go with it and what to do with it. And I think that is super, super important in terms of, yeah, having someone that's not only got experience in the specific space, but also a desire to stay there and really push their career in that direction. That's where I think the magic happens.
Yeah, all of those things so important because, going back to one of your first points, if they don't have a portfolio with your exact channel, let's just say, Facebook ads, because that's primarily what we're designing. Do you have to ask yourself, do we have time to train them? Do we have the budget? Do we have time to train them? And do we feel like there's going to be a high success rate to train them on this? And if the answer is no, which if you're a scrappy startup agency, more than likely the answer is going to be no, right? Because that's where, if you have a small team, misfits stand out a lot more. You need to be looking for somebody that has experience. And like you were saying with the passion piece, are they going to show up every day and be ready to be excited to do what they're doing? Or are they going to feel like this work is becoming just kind of too monotonous because they're not actually excelling in what they want to do in, right? Let's say they are having to do Facebook ads and they really enjoy logo design or landing page design or something like that, right? When they don't have that passion, more often than not, things like quality control, things like coming up with new, fresh ideas is going to lack, because that's what they're doing is not where their attention is. It's not where they want to be. It's not what they want to grow in. Right.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked a lot there about graphic design, but thinking about, really the topic of this episode is around hiring a creative team or a creative department. Copywriter, exactly the same. It's exactly the same thing. If you have someone who is a writer, it's so different to having someone who is a copywriter for performance marketing creative. Kind of similar concept there around like ability to attract attention, but direct response marketing is its own kettle of fish that is so different to any other type of writing. And again, without the right experience and without the right drive, I think it's really difficult to kind of progress in the agency world in these spaces. I think some of my best ideas, and this is a catch-22 in terms of input versus output, but some of my best ideas come from when I've been, I don't know, maybe a bit unmotivated of an evening, and I've spent a couple of hours scrolling TikTok, and I get when you get in those demotivated like scroll holes, I call them, when I really should cook dinner, or I really should take the dog for a walk, but then TikTok pulls you in. The catch-22 with it working in this industry is like that always gives me loads of inspiration. Like when I'm doing that scrolling, I'll quite often like save links or send them to myself on Slack so that I can pick them up at work the next day and add it to my ideas log for clients. And I think that's exactly what I mean about the passion. Like, if you don't have the passion to be in that industry, you're never going to kind of capture those opportunities or find those opportunities. And it's not that I'm by no means suggesting that my team or any creative team should be using their spare time to scroll TikTok and get ideas. Definitely not. But it's just the difference in how much a team can progress when you've got someone in the seat who genuinely loves the industry, finds it interesting. God, that's a really great way to apply like marketing psychology. Oh, that testimonial creative there, I've never seen it done like that. Those types of things, when you are really passionate about it, is exactly what can move a department forward and what can move performance for our clients forward as well.
And you adding the passion piece into that honestly kind of opened my eyes a little bit, because I've never correlated what I'm about to bring up to the passion for the role, but it just makes complete sense. And that is, when I was talking with our most recent copywriter hire, we were talking about in onboarding, we were talking about like hour expectations, like time of day, when you're working, things like that. And because I have done copywriting before, nowhere near as good as our newest hire, thankfully, right? Hire better. But because I've done it before, I've done creative work before, I completely understand, like you're saying, you have different points in the day when you feel most creative. And for most people, after you've had your energy rebound, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 p.m., that's when you start to get more creative, right? In the afternoon. And I completely understand as well that sometimes you'll work on something and then need to let it sit for a little bit, come back to it and be like, oh, that is awful. That is great. Let me chop this up and move this around. So as a business owner, as the manager of a team, like, of course you don't want to ask people to work after hours or work, but at the same time with a creative team, I feel there might need to be a bit of an understanding of, like straight 8 hours could be a little bit constrictive on getting the best work possible. Because if somebody's really just coming in, clocking in, doing that 8-hour shift and then clocking out, they may not be tapping into some of their most creative times. And when you add in the passion piece on, if someone is passionate about the role, they're going to be looking for new opportunities or thinking about opportunities kind of all day, right? That's where that piece comes in. And I just want to clarify as I round that off, you don't want people working 10, 12-hour days, right? It's just being a little bit flexible with the work schedule to fit the creative times of people, I guess would be a way to put it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point as well. And I'm an absolutely awful copywriter. And I've been looking for resources to maybe try and become a little bit better, at least, at copywriting. And one of the things that every time I read any resources about copywriting or just writing in general, it was, get it down on paper, get everything down, and then have a break and then come back and edit. Like, don't try and just sit down and get one thing kind of done at once. And that really surprised me. And probably why I'm not a natural copywriter. But I think, that's a really kind of interesting point around, letting things stew and then coming back to it.
And then checking it later.
And I think the other part of it as well is that, and this is maybe a bit controversial and you might disagree, I don't think to be in a creative role, you have to necessarily be a very creative person. Actually, let me redefine that. To be in a performance marketing creative role, you don't have to be a particularly creative person. I am so uncreative. I don't have a creative bone in my body, but I'm great with creative strategy because I've got so much experience. And with performance marketing, there are, so many that have gone before us that have kind of paved the way and done really great things and, kind of taught us the principles of direct response marketing, of performance marketing. And so leaning into that, I think, is really, really important, especially when you're managing client spends as well. Is like, we absolutely have to be taking big swings, net new, but there has to be a balance. And it's also, and again, there is a point here that links to what we were talking about, I promise, that to me links to the passion piece, is like being able to kind of understand what works in the industry, what are, best practices, what types of creatives should every single client account have. And when you look at an account, you see that it's missing something, without that passion, without that knowledge, you can't find those gaps. I think being a creative person in a performance marketing creative role doesn't have to be the same thing. Like, I think the two things can kind of exist separately as well.
Break down one thing for me. What is your definition of creative? Like, does it play into like functionality of Adobe tools, or does it play into like coming up with new concepts of creatives? Just tell me what your definition of it looks like.
Good question. For me, I'd say it's the new ideas. Like, when I say, if I define myself as not a very creative person, I could go and look at, let's say, I don't know, Savannah Sanchez, her kind of newsfeed or LinkedIn feed. She's always giving amazing inspiration and ideas on creative formats. I use her inspiration all the time. I can't, like, my brain just isn't the brain that comes up with those ideas. So when I say I don't feel like I'm a creative person necessarily, that's what I mean, is I can't, like, the big, the new big swings and ideas, that's where I'd say like creativity lies. I think, it's a funny one. And I think with marketing, I've always said you need experience and time within the role to like really actually become strong in that area. Like, coming straight out of uni and being book smart about marketing is one thing, but having worked in performance marketing industry for 5, 10, 15 years is another. And I think once you've worked in this industry for a while, you start to build this sixth sense about what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I think that's what makes up for my individual lack of creativity, is just my experience and passion about this industry, of kind of being able to spot the patterns and trends and know what's going to work and what's not going to work. But for me, would I be the one starting the trends? Probably not. And not coming up with those ideas.
I think it's interesting. I think there's definitely a balance with it. Creativity is good. I think there can be over creativity where it's always focusing on just the most not reaching, but the most elaborate brand new ideas possible, which could win, but also is likely backed by not a lot of data and is going to back up production timelines greatly. We definitely want net new things, right? Like, we want new ideas, we want stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel it takes understanding, like you said, what could work and what couldn't work, and what is priority within the business, right? Because there's a lot of pieces that come into it. I think as there's passion for any new role or any new thing, should it be copywriting, should it be graphic design, this or that? I think that coming up with as many ideas as possible is very attractive, because it's like there is feeling of accomplishment or value in the ideation standpoint, right? But oftentimes, if things aren't backed by experience, backed by data, and don't have proper execution, ideas just kind of rest as either ideas or end up being creatives that don't perform that well, right? So I would say, I don't, I've seen your work. I know you have creativity in you, and as a plane flies 1,000 miles an hour, you feel like you're moving rather slow, but you're actually moving very fast. So as that experience in the industry continues to build, acknowledgement of certain things you do kind of diminishes a little bit. Self-acknowledgement of things you do kind of diminishes a little bit, because it becomes second nature, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah. It's funny, actually, I was chatting to literally yesterday a guy in the team who was helping me put together a new creative brief for a client. And we were talking about the difference between, I'm going off track here, but we'll keep it quick. The difference between new and iterations. And there was a lot of iterations in the brief. And I said, we should probably have a bit more new in there for the client. Don't want the client to feel like we're just reusing things that have been done before. We should have a balance of, new stuff that we're testing and iterations on stuff that we know has worked, and that's data led and really strategic. And we were looking at testimonial overlays as a creative theme, and he was like, well, we've done it before, so I can't really call that new, can I? And I was like, well, if you do it in a different way, where the actual example was we'd found something on Foreplay where it was a testimonial, but it was also a split screen. So there was, a few different elements to the creative, and it looked great. And we felt it would work really, really well with this client specifically. So I was like, actually, that's new, because we've never done it in that way before. I said, and I know it's not very black and white, but that, I think, is where, that's, I think, what I mean about not having to necessarily be a really creative person to be in a creative role, because like that was an opportunity for this client that would work really, really well. It's not brand new, because, we were inspired by something that we'd seen on Foreplay, but it was brand new for that client. And actually the thinking behind it was, we've done split screen styles with this client before. It worked really well. The layout with the product on there with a person fit really well for the niche of this client. And so it was really creative and really new for that client, but you don't have to recreate the wheel every time, coming up with these new things that nobody's ever done before. You can absolutely still be creative within, existing proven formats or themes, and make it creative and make it innovative for the client in front of you, depending on what their unique needs, USPs, pain points, etc. are. So I think you're right, what you said there about you kind of diminish your own view, I guess, because you get so used to doing those things. And that's probably a good example of where, creativity meets, innovation.
And it's interesting. I'll kind of elaborate on that, even though we're talking about building a team, but this is such an important thing that we've seen. Think about like a media buyer, right? If a media buyer is running a cost cap campaign or an Advantage Plus campaign, whatever, right? And it's working, and they launch another campaign, same structure, same build, similar features with, targeting, whatever. A client's not going to be like, hey, you've already launched a campaign like that. Why are we launching another one? We need a brand new style. We need something completely brand new, right? Like I feel like you're getting lazy with this. But creative, because it's so visual and because it has so much value to the client for like, this is my brand and this is how I represent it. And also because it's very common, or could be very common, for agencies or designers, whatever, to just quote unquote go the lazy route and use templates, right? That there is a lower perceived value in the creative. And it can also, or not also, it can be easy to lose focus on the goal of the creative, which is to drive profitable sales, and just focus on the want with the creative, which is fancy, shiny, new every time, all the time.
Yeah. And it's funny. And the guy in our team, actually, what he said to me last night, I said to him, you've hit the nail on the head here. He said, it takes me longer to brief an iteration than it does to just chuck something new into a brief. Because with the iteration, especially if it's video, you're looking at hook rate of this, hold rate of that, which one should go with this, which call to actions had the best click-through rate, which one had the best conversion rate, what was the motivator there, what was here, and actually stitching all that together to have something new that you really stand behind from a data perspective takes way longer than just looking at a new image on Foreplay, copying and pasting the link and giving it to your designer and saying, hey, recreate this. So it's really funny, actually. And I love the way our team member summarized it last night, was to say, the client experience is really important, because that's whether they whether they choose to stay with us or not. And it's definitely this fine balance between kind of helping them to understand the work that goes behind stuff versus making them feel good about what they're getting from us as a service. So yeah, that is a whole other podcast episode for sure, though.
But on that same note of balancing what we want, which is performance, with, client expectation and net new, I've seen the same situation when it comes to hiring, and I keep going back to graphic designers. Copywriting is a role as well, and it could apply there. But hiring graphic designers and bringing up the concept of creative themes, in a very negative term, could be called templates, where it's not as attractive to work in the role of graphic designer. This is the way I'm perceiving it. I'm not one. If you're going to constantly be doing iterations or working based off of themes that have worked well in the past, because as a designer, you want to be building net new. You want to be building fresh things. You want to come up with stuff. And that's where having someone that has experience in D2C, paid media, direct response, creative, Facebook ads, can also be very beneficial, because you're not going to gradually over the weeks and months start to lose their interest because they're working on something that they feel is undervalued for their skills, because they're not focused on the data, they're focused on the design.
Yeah. And that's where the passion, I think, for the industry comes back as well, because that's the thing that gets me excited, in both with my media buying hat on and with my creative strategist hat on, is performance. Is, did we kick butt with that creative? And I think that's where maybe like the unicorns of graphic designers, copywriters, any kind of creative role in a performance marketing agency sits, is that desire to build something that the numbers back it up. The numbers look great. We've improved performance. We've got, the success rate of the package, or we're improving the ROAS by X%, or we've reduced the cost per lead by Y%. And I think that, again, to kind of keep going back to it, but that passion is what will really set candidates aside.
And with that, you and I are constantly looking at one thing when it comes to hiring, or when it comes to training, actually, which is there's a pretty big divide in the marketing industry or the creative industry where executors, so graphic designers, copywriters, oftentimes don't get access to data and don't understand how their creative is performing or how their copy is performing, which can hinder them growing. It can hinder them evolving their skill and understanding what they need to do, because their job is create it. Oh, it got approved. I'm done. Hands are clean. And now I'm going to, have to communicate with the creative strategist on what next steps are. On the inverse, though, one thing that we don't look at or haven't talked about as much, which I think is an interesting question, is to manage the team, to manage a designer, to manage a copywriter. Do you feel like the creative strategist, or whoever the role title is that's in charge of them, should consider taking fundamental graphic design or fundamental copywriting training if they don't have that experience, to understand things to look for, like text hierarchy and alignment and this and that? Do you think that type of thing would be helpful on the inverse as well?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. Pros and cons, I guess. Pros, I would say the biggest thing for me, I've ran a creative department before, but I didn't project manage it. I was just the head of the department. Whereas now I'm a lot more hands-on. I'm head of the department and I project manage, and I'm the creative strategist. So I'm really in the delivery and I'm in the project management. And one thing that would definitely have been helpful to understand, I guess, is the technical aspects of how long things take. So one of the things that our designer said to me a few times is around, how long it takes to export things, especially if it's a package of 20 videos and each video is 30 seconds to a minute long. The amount of time that I need to add for him, the way I need to structure things to allow him to be able to kind of have that export time, not sit twiddling his thumbs, or like line up the work so that export will happen overnight and then he can give me the files in the morning. Those types of things. I had no idea about any of that. So maybe some of the more technical aspects of what being a graphic designer involves. However, I don't think in terms of, let's say one thing our graphic designer is great at, and he talks about is, color psychology, that type of thing. I don't really know a lot about that. Would it be good for me to learn more about that? Maybe. As the creative strategist, it would be good to say, let's use tones that, are trustworthy. Let's use tones that are fiery and passionate. Yet let's use tones that are whatever emotion is we're trying to evoke in the creative. But those are the types of things that I think actually should be where the graphic designer excels. Like, it's their kind of role to be the expert in those things. And I would absolutely lean on them to lead the way with that, because it's like you said, you hire to be better than you. Definitely. Like, I am not a graphic designer. I probably won't ever be a graphic designer. There's that kind of alternate universe down the pan. But so I need my graphic designer to be strong in those areas. But it's a bit of a catch-22, because you don't know what you don't know. So if he'd never introduced me, I mean, I knew about color psychology before, but let's say, for example, as a creative strategist, if you don't know anything about color strategy, you can't then tell your graphic designer to implement color strategy to match the emotion that we're trying to evoke within the creative. So that's why I say yes and no. I think, now I'm talking it out loud, a basic, underlying level of understanding would be really useful to get those basics around, things that I've picked up along the way. Like, generally, we know people read left to right from the top to the bottom. So if you're going to have a discount logo, cross out with a discount on it, I would say stick it in the top left corner, because that's likely where it's going to get the most eyeballs, and then you grab people in with a discount. So that type of stuff, I think, in terms of design and how people interact with and consume content, I think that's really important for a creative strategist to understand. But executionally, I would say I would really need my graphic designer and want my graphic designer to be excelling there and showing me the way.
And it's almost like knowing it, like you're saying, base level enough to be able to look for it in the interview process, to be able to make sure you're bringing on the right person, because ideally, you're not going to have to check for that every single time. Like you're working with somebody who handles that and has that as like their secondhand nature to design with or to write with copywriting wise. So you're not having to remind them of those things, but at least knowing it well enough to have it on the job expectations, to have it on the scorecard, and to make sure that you are holding that person accountable to mastering or to owning those areas, right? Instead of the negative would be having to teach them those areas and having to make sure they're following it all the time.
Yeah. Slight segue, but I think a really important thing that we should talk about is hiring a creative strategist.